It is called Green Line because, according to the rumors, a British officer took a map and drew the line with a green pen. That's why they call it Green Line. That's what the rumors say. What does it mean? Well, it means it is the only divided capital, the country in the European Union. It is something that holds two peoples of the two sides of Cyprus away from each other. And on the other hand, it means there are two separate authorities in Cyprus which should be respected equally, they're political equals, and we must, both communities actually, work together to get rid of this green line. That is the whole idea in northern Cyprus, and this is reflected in their choice in the referenda, which said 65% yes to the referenda that was held on 24th of April 2004, just before the unilateral entrance of the Greek Cypriots to the European Union. So the Turkish Cypriots are doing whatever they can to, let's say, overcome this obstacle to get two communities together again and in one country under a federal solution. That is basically how it is understood in Turkish Cypriot side. We say it's a border because Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus is a state which has its borders, customs offices at port checkpoints, and it's a separate authority. It's a state. So that's why it is called border. That's how we look at it actually. But we are trying to get rid of all these borders so that we can unite under one country. I don't know what they call it, United Cyprus Republic, or I don't know, whatever. But our ultimate aim is to get rid of that green line, and we need cooperation from the other side. We are doing everything we can, but all the time when a gate issue comes up to open a new gate, they try to divert the agenda to something else, and everything is locked again, and we come to a stalemate, and we don't know what to do actually. And somebody, or, I don't know, the international community should put some pressure on them so that they can work with us to open new gates, to bring people together again, to create the trust between the two communities that was lost, a long time ago. So first thing we have to do is to create the trust between the two communities, have them have some relations again, and this is done on opening the new checkpoints or borders, crossing points, let's say, is the best way to do it, because the more you have the crossing points, the more contacts you have, and the more contacts will bring you more closer, and this will help both communities to reach peace, to have peace again in this island, and to learn how to live together again. This day, 2003, 23rd April, TRNC has decided to open the new gates because they thought that the two communities were moving away from each other, and they thought it would be better to have contacts for the people to get to know each other again. So they decided, the Council of Ministers decided to open the gates, the borders to the mutual crossings. And the Greek Cypriots did not object to this initiative of the TRNC, and fortunately the gates were opened. Only two gates I think at that time, and then with our initiative to open more gates, I think there are now 5 gates are open at the moment. So people are coming and going from these checkpoints. And another thing that helped open the gates in our side is the European Union's Court of Human Rights ruling. They said that we should let people who have houses in this house, property in this house, to visit. The Greek Cypriots who has property in the TRNC has to visit, and that was another thing that motivated the government a lot of the time to open the gates. So the gates were opened, and the people are going and getting to know each other, but we need more gates actually. For example, the Ledra Street gate, it should be open. We have done everything we can to open that gate, but all the time the Greek Cypriots came with an excuse not to open that gate. They are saying it's the flags or soldiers, but all the checkpoints has soldiers. I mean, it's just an excuse to not open that gate. And of course, there is the direct trade regulation in the agenda of the European Union. Direct trade from TRNC to the European Union countries, and they are trying to prevent this, and they are all the time diverting the agenda to something else. For example, Lokmacı Gate is on the agenda, and they are trying to open another gate in the western part of the island. I mean, first let's open the Lokmacı Gate, and then sit down and talk how are we going to open the other gate in the western side of the country. So all the time they are trying to divert the subjects to something else, so that they don't open new gates or they don't act on certain thing. That's how it has. That's how has been the case all through the process. Actually, this Annan process and everything. And for example, we campaigned for yes in Annan plan, and 65% of the Turkish Cypriots said yes to the reunification of the island. Unfortunately, 75% of the Greek Cypriots said no to the Annan plan because of Papadopoulos's and Akel's attitude. Because they came out and say you should not vote yes to Annan plan, and now we are at a stalemate. I mean, there is 8 July process, of course, 2006, and both leaders agreed that they should work on technical committees. It's been, I don't know, 8 or 10 months now, and nothing has been done because of the intransigent attitude of the Greek Cypriots. So if we have, established that technical committees, I mean, we would have by now some concrete things that we can work for a solution on the island. And unfortunately, they are blaming us for blocking the 8 July process, which is not true. We are all the time we are proposing things to break this stalemate and open the way for comprehensive negotiations for the solution of the Cyprus problem.
Well, the terminology resulted from 1963, when intercommunal fighting erupted in Nicosia, and then the commander of the force that was established to control the situation, a British by the name of Peter Young, used a green pencil to draw the line onto the map to separate the two areas of Nicosia, and that's why the name came to be the Green Line. Of course, eventually, this separation expanded through all Cyprus, caused by the Turkish invasion in 1974. That area now is called the buffer zone, or the Green Line. Well, originally it was viewed as a temporary measure to prevent the fighting. Nobody thought it would last for 44 years already, since 1963. This force division was enhanced after the military invasion of Turkey in 1974. It continues to this date, and it basically is the point where the Turkish troops stopped in 1974, the ceasefire line, and where the National Guard retained its position. Of course, the United Nations have been here since 1964 with different degrees of military strength, and they are patrolling the so-called buffer zone. It's a very special area of Cyprus. It's important to remember that it constitutes part of the Republic of Cyprus. It is Cypriot territory. The government of Cyprus has given temporary military jurisdiction only to UNFICYP, the United Nations force in Cyprus. And of course, according to the UN mandate, their purpose there is to help re-establish normal conditions in the area. It is unfortunate that in many cases, citizens who have land there have great difficulty in building a house. The UN deems these situations as dangerous or potentially threatening to the security of the area. And very often we have this problematic attitude from the UN, which does not allow constructions to be built. There's no diplomatic or other contact with the government of Turkey or the Turkish regime in the north. I think it was done in view of the accession of Cyprus into the European Union. It would be extremely awkward to have Cyprus into the EU and have part of Cyprus without functioning as EU territory. The situation currently is that the whole of Cyprus has entered into the European Union, the whole of territory of the Republic of Cyprus, with acquis communautaire, the rules and regulations of the European Union, temporarily being suspended in the occupied part. Initially, we were pleasantly surprised that the restrictions of movement were lifted. That's what we thought at the beginning, but then we realized that they're not completely lifted. Anyone who would like to cross into the occupied part of Cyprus is still subject to a serious check by the Turkish military, and all the officers of the Turkish army are reviewing the so-called applications to enter. So it's not like there is real freedom of movement. People can take their car and go there. Have to present traveling documents, a passport, as if they were entering their country, and request permission from the Turkish military to enter into the occupied part of Cyprus. So there's still a problematic situation regarding the movement into the north. It did make a very big difference because for 30 years the expelled Greek Cypriots were not able to visit their properties and their houses, and now suddenly they have the chance, even with the problems in moving, to go to the occupied part and see the place where they grew up and where they lived, they spent their youth. The sad thing is that they find a new settler in their home, because Turkey has been bringing illegal settlers all along. So it's just a sad realization of the results of the invasion. New inhabitants now reside in the houses of these people that were forcibly expelled in 1974. So far there have been about 12 million crossings from the occupied areas and back. It helps a lot re-establish the confidence between the two communities, because now there is contact between them. Many thousands of Turkish Cypriots visit the free areas every day and they work here. But this is not a solution to the Cyprus problem. The government already proposed a total of 8 additional crossing points throughout the Green Line. But the main problem remains the continued presence of the Turkish army. There is the prospect for these openings. Of course, we cannot do it alone as a government. We have to have the agreement of the Turkish military. One fine example is the famous Lidra Street crossing. Lidra is where the Green Line was drawn originally in 1963 and has been closed ever since. And the last year there was serious talk about reopening that crossing. Unfortunately, the Turkish military built a bridge there that was not part of the agreement, and that made the process stop for about a year. Then, after about a year, under pressure from the international community, the bridge was dismantled, and that created a lot of positive momentum. From our side, we have destroyed the wall that separated Lidra Street, and the only thing remaining now is for the military to be removed from the area. Turkey is a candidate country to enter into the European Union. It does receive some pressure from the international community. I believe the key lies in Ankara. Turks are not known for their flexibility or goodwill, so I'm not very hopeful. As you know, the Annan plan was rejected by one of the two communities, and page 1 said that if it's rejected by either of the two communities, it's null and void. So technically it's not on the table anymore. Following the efforts of the international community through the Annan plan, was another initiative, again by the United Nations, which resulted in the July 8th agreement of 2006. Basically, the leaders of the two communities, Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, agreed to create technical committees and working groups in order to start handling some key areas of the Cyprus problem, with the purpose to lead to a meeting of the two leaders in order to have full-fledged negotiations. There was some problem from the Turkish side regarding the implementation of this agreement. We almost reached an agreement very recently, in March of 2006, but suddenly the Turkish side withdrew its interest, and I understand now they're trying to bring back different scenarios that have to do with the Annan plan. So this is a serious negative development if they really will abandon the process of the July 8 agreement, and it's something that the international community should address.
The Green Line was a line separating communities to that, all intents and purposes. Therefore, the emphasis should be not on the green but on the line. A buffer zone obviously implies a space, and the buffer zone relates to the two ceasefire lines where the opposing forces stopped, those being separated by varying distances depending on your location along the 180 plus kilometer length of that buffer zone. So in some areas the buffer zone is about 7 kilometers wide, and in other areas, as in the old town of Nicosia, it's 4 meters wide. The northern delineation is where Turkish forces stopped their advance, and the southern, where the National Guard stopped its positions. So not total agreement as to the delineation between the opposing forces. There's no sign-off. So in consequence there is, at times, shall we say, differing opinions as to what constitutes the ceasefire line. The UN has its views and the UN sticks with its definition. As I say, not always agreed to constantly or subsequently. This sometimes results in agreement to disagree. It also at times brings up controversies, as for example at the time when the Ledra Street crossing was first mooted and the Turkish Cypriots removed the wall and then built a bridge. The Greek Cypriots insisted that that bridge crossed the Green Line. We countered, saying that it may well have crossed what constituted the Green Line, but it did not intrude into the buffer zone. So there are times when the Green Line and the buffer zone are synonymous, in the sense that the line may overlap in some areas, but generally speaking the buffer zone is a creation of 74. The Green Line goes back to much earlier. In the context of Cyprus, it strikes me as being perfectly pragmatic that the buffer zone would indeed, to the extent possible, accommodate communities that were within it. The emphasis on our approach to the buffer zone as UN goes back to our mandated responsibility, primarily to prevent recurrence of fighting, and secondarily a return to what would constitute normal conditions. In that context, therefore, security takes priority, and everything else falls into place after that. So, in the buffer zone, there are the villages that thrive are villages that are at a safe remove from security-sensitive issues, whether it is proximity to the opposing ceasefire line or to minefields. And as I said, the buffer zone is sort of a variegated landscape, and it is of varied width. So there are plenty of places where you would look in and see very little that would strike you as different from any other part of the island. You will see farmers farming, whether they are sowing or harvesting, looking after their fields, and we operate a system of permits. The permits are issued on the basis of evidence of land ownership or entitlement to use land. Obviously, the bulk of that land in the buffer zone is Greek Cypriot owned. The villages, there are something like 8,000 people living in 6 villages. All but one of the villages are Greek Cypriot. The one village, the exception, is Pila. Pila is a mixed village, 1,000 Greek Cypriots, 500 Turkish Cypriots. The access to these villages is more or less routine, open. But there are restrictions on going beyond the village, as it were, or beyond the access route into the buffer zone. The same restrictions apply. The kind of qualified right to use land inside the buffer zone, provided it does not raise security issues. They have access to their village, and since these are, as I said, predominantly, in fact, Greek Cypriot villages, that means they access on roads coming in from the south. So they can drive straight in and out of the village. Then, to all intents and purposes, no different than any other village, other than slight nuance change vis-a-vis law and order, and also by virtue of them in a way being surrounded by buffer zone other than the access road, same limitations apply. They do not have access to the rest of the buffer zone. They are what are called civil use areas. Well, inevitably it has changed. Obviously, the further you move away from a conflict situation, the more, or hopefully, the less acute the actual situation of being on a security footing. The mission itself, in terms of numbers, of course, has been has changed. So there have been times when there were as many as 6,000 peacekeepers on this mission. At one point, before 1974, the mission's responsibilities were island-wide in terms of the intercommunal strife. As a result of 74 and the division of the island, the UN responsibilities focus on the buffer zone. So you come from, in a sense, 100% of the island to 3% of the island, which is the amount of territory the buffer zone accounts for. Peacekeeping numbers, as I say, have been as high as 6,000, currently at their lowest, 860. For the longest time we had 1,230 peacekeepers patrolling the buffer zone. This changed in 2005. It was decreed following an evaluation, a very thorough on-the-ground evaluation at that by a team from New York, working in close consultation with the mission, that it was possible for the mission to downsize in terms of the number of peacekeepers, and they recommended a 30% cutback. This cutback, in a sense, made good managerial sense. It was the first time since '93 that we had really looked at the numbers in relation to the task, and the conclusion was that by going more mobile and by adapting new technology, we would be in a position to do the same job. Obviously, although we have fewer numbers, the buffer zone hasn't diminished. We still have the same amount of buffer zone to cover. One of the ways that we did it was, as I say, to get more mobile. In getting more mobile, it didn't mean that we suddenly acquired cars or whatever we always had, but prior to that the emphasis had been on static observation. So there were lookout or observation posts along the buffer zone which were resource intensive or manpower intensive. By essentially pulling back from that and instead setting up irregular but frequent patrols, we were able, we believe, to do the same job. Ironically, the initial result of that was actually that we came across more infractions of the status quo, if you like, by the opposing forces, because in a way our moves were less predictable, and so we encountered what would amount to violations more often. This does not mean that the situation has become more tense or that there is greater cause for concern. As I say, I think it is simply that mobility means you appear in places perhaps more frequently, and certainly with a little bit of a surprise element where you're not as predictable. I mean, most people are aware of our function, and they accept it until it, in some way, shall we say, personally inconveniences them, and then we're probably seen as an irritant. In general, after all, we have been here 43 years, so to some extent we are seen perhaps as old furniture, faded wallpaper. But within the buffer zone, the two or three areas where we run into misunderstandings or where there may be irritation apply one to farming. Sometimes farmers, being farmers, want to plough and work the fields regardless of location. Land is land, and ain't that grand. And I come from Ireland, so I know the view that people who work the land take of it. And so not always is a farmer convinced that a soldier from somewhere else should be telling him that he can or what he cannot do. And some of the time farmers themselves take huge risks. There have been instances where farmers have gone into minefields to plant and to sow on the presumption or assumption that since the fence is broken down and nothing had happened over the years, it must be okay. And so they spread their fences and cross lines. Sometimes there is irritation and reaction if they go too close to the north. And so again, they may get irritated with the UN. Another aspect where community comes into maybe too close proximity to the UN and doesn't necessarily appreciate the UN's restrictions is in the hunting season. As you can well imagine, the UN peacekeepers who patrol the buffer zone in three sectors. We have Argentinians in the west, we have British peacekeepers in the Nicosia general area, and then to the east we have Hungarians and Slovaks patrolling their sector of the buffer zone. They're men in uniform, they wear blue helmets or blue berets, UN insignia vehicles, and their task is to ensure that two opposing forces, uniformed, respect the unofficial ceasefire lines, north and south, that delineate the buffer zone. That's two uniform groups they have to keep an eye on. You can imagine how much it complicates their job when, on Wednesdays and Sundays, for considerable periods, different seasons of the year, you have other people coming in uniforms with weapons, these being hunters, who wear camouflage uniforms that are not dissimilar to military uniforms, who carry guns, and who go in, though they are not supposed to be in the buffer zone, after wildlife, big or small, depending on the game season. Animals, being smart, in general, realize when the hunting season's on that it's probably safer to be in the buffer zone than outside. So they seek refuge in the buffer zone. Hunters then decide, well, that's where the animals are, we're going to go in, even though we're not supposed to be in. And that becomes a sore point. It also serves, however, to underscore that the buffer zone, in a way, has become a kind of default environmental zone, with some very interesting and wildlife, the mouflon, some very, very, very beautiful birds that pass through it as well. Also underscores that when there was the outbreak of bird flu, both sides had to acknowledge the bird flu, whether they recognized one another or not, and therefore with assistance from the UN, they laid down decontamination mats and procedures at the various crossing points in order to minimize the possibility of a further spread of the one outbreak of bird flu that was identified, which occurred in the north. And thank God, there were no further outbreaks. We have a responsibility of care for people in the buffer zone, and particularly, as I've said earlier, because we issue a system of permits, we keep a constant lookout for unauthorized personnel in the buffer zone. When it came to the crossing points, which opened at virtually, the first crossing point opened on, actually, this is 2007, 4 years ago today. This is the 23rd of April. And it was announced the previous evening by the Turkish Cypriot leader, Mr. Denktash, at the time, that he would be opening a crossing point the following morning down at Ledra Palace. There was no more advance warning than that, no provision. So we basically faced an unknown situation the following morning. When I got down to the crossing point at Ledra Palace, there were two somewhat bemused Turkish Cypriot policemen sitting on chairs in the open air with pencils and notebooks, and not terribly sure whether or not there would be a crossing point opened, and if so, what would their responsibilities be. That very quickly became a massively congested area, because it happened that later that week was the biggest holiday of the year on the island, Orthodox Easter. And I think in the space of those first 2 or 3 days, something like 48,000 people attempted to cross. Understandably, it having been many, many years since there had been, they had the freedom to move about the island. We realized very quickly that this was way too much traffic in much too congested, much too narrow an area. And we called upon the two sides to come up with an alternative, or to come up with an additional crossing point to deal with this extraordinary and congested flow. So within a matter of weeks, the second crossing point was opened at Ayas Timetios, which then took traffic, vehicular traffic, because at that time initially it was vehicles plus pedestrians at Ledra, which in and of itself is a sort of a bottleneck with two corners. Since then, 3 more crossing points have opened. Again, in terms of the rule of the responsibility of care, the crossing point up at Astromaritis, which is to the west, about 30 kilometers west of Nicosia, that crossing point posed somewhat different problems. It wasn't a sort of 200-meter or 300-meter strip. It was nearly 2 kilometers through farming land between Astromaritis and Zodia and Bostanci. It also was an area where that crossing point was going to pass through, or very, very close to, a known minefield. So it was incumbent upon us to ensure that the area was made safe as well as secure. So making it safe entailed demining. Making it secure entailed ensuring that there was a good solid fence system running across that almost 2 kilometers of buffer zone traverse, so that people wouldn't be, unauthorized people couldn't just turn off the road, as it were, and head into the buffer zone. So all of that was worked out with the cooperation of the two sides. We're now at the conundrum of opening the crossing point at Ledra Street. The two sides have yet to agree to exactly what constitutes acceptable terms to the two of them, and it takes 2 to cross. We, in the meantime, are standing ready to facilitate and do everything we can to help once there is agreement between the two sides. We know for a fact that what we will have to do, and again, because of the responsibility of care, is to ensure that, one, there is no unexploded ordnance in that area of the buffer zone. It's a precaution. We do not, by taking such a precaution, imply that we believe or suspect that there is explosive material in the area, but we have to just be absolutely sure. We also have to be sure that the buildings in the area are secure. And by secure, I mean these are buildings that haven't been used since 1974. And some of them are not in the best of shape. So we need to kind of secure them, prop them up, shore them up, ensure whatever agreement is reached as to the area of traverse there, that those crossing back and forth would not be at risk